the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat.
I believe there's a pause in the narrative, and I think the woman was approaching the midst of the garden when she encountered this creature, this beast of the field. So in the tabernacle layout, that would be illustrated as they're in the holy place, but not the Holy of Holies. All right. And then I think the woman entered the Holy of Holies, the garden midst, where Adam was. And then I think it was just the woman and Adam with the tree there. And I think it's at that time the woman then, in the presence of the tree, then it says,
And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise.
I think that's what happens. Just because I've heard people ask, like, how could Adam stand there and listen to this serpent beguiling the woman, and he's just standing there and not saying anything? And like, why would the serpent talk to a man's woman in front of him like that? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I think the man wasn't present when the woman spoke with the serpent. And then she went into the presence of the man where the tree was, and that's when she recalled what the serpent said and saw, yes, indeed, this tree is good, pleasant to the eye, and stuff. You know, she remembered what the serpent said and gave in to it. That's just how I see it. I could be wrong.
That's actually how I saw it even before this whole discussion. Is the serpent decided to try to beguile the woman, to beguile Eve, and then Adam just wasn't around, and then he just kind of showed up, and Eve convinced him, and he ate of the fruit as well. Yeah, I think he would. You're right. I think if he was around, not only would he allow this beast to convince his wife, but also would probably be like, "Oh, hold on, that's not what we're supposed to eat from there, hun. We probably should not do that." So I would agree that I think he just wasn't. He was probably keeping and dressing the garden elsewhere.
Yeah. Something else is that the serpent may have only wanted the woman to fall. You know, if he wants her to be shown to be not so suitable after all, you know, haha, like the serpent's hoping to do.
You know what? That actually makes a lot of sense. He was upset that the woman took his place, and I think you're right. Maybe he just wanted the woman to fall so that he could take the woman's place.
Yeah.
Huh. Makes logical sense. And then it went a bit too far when Adam ate of the fruit.
I know Eve did some beguiling of her own, though. I think, because it says at the end of chapter 3, it says in verse 17,
because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife.
And that is just like later on, Abraham hearkens to the voice of his wife Sarah to have a child with Hagar, Ishmael.
And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai.
You know, and so when you hearken to the voice of your wife, it always leads into trouble. That's what the Bible teaches, Lane. We're not told, though, that Eve said anything at all to Adam. So we don't know what she said. She said something.
Well, I'd imagine she could have done some more sort of convincing or beguiling herself to get Adam to eat the fruit.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll get into this. I'll get into why I think she beguiled Adam. I'm getting ahead of myself. But I'm going to lose my audience here. They'll be like, what do you mean she beguiled Adam? Okay. Let's see. Okay, here's more important stuff.
And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons.
Like I mentioned before, and I'll mention here again. Verse 7b, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. This is an excerpt from a parallel account that was placed here in this spot by the priests for the purpose of obfuscating what's going on here. It's meant to clean it up a little, kind of like we find in Genesis 9, where Ham does something, but we don't know what. He does something while Noah's drunk and we don't know what. We have the same kind of thing here. And if you read straight through and read past the part that's highlighted in blue there, you can get a better idea of just what happened exactly. And what you have is Adam and Eve, who are on the threshold of 13. They eat the fruit, they turn 13. They gain the knowledge of good and evil. They experience maturity and maturity of body as well. And then, being of the right age now, they just naturally engage in sexual intercourse right there. And they probably didn't even understand why. It would have been real natural. And people have probably read this 1,000 times and may never have realized, like, well, of course, yes, this is what happened in the garden. And I don't know why, but it just doesn't really dawn on a lot of people that that's what happened here. So, but you can tell that's what happened. If you read it without that, it says, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. So here they would have ran out of the midst of the garden into the trees to hide. And they didn't stop and tie branches around their waist first, and they certainly didn't sit down and sew fig leaf aprons. The word sewed there, they sewed these aprons. It's more likely they weaved this together. Weaving together is what's the idea there, probably. Scholars actually struggle over that one. They're not quite sure what to make of it. They didn't sit and prepare coverings, I guess most people picture this as they ate the fruit and then saw that they were naked and they got embarrassed, and so the both of them just kind of snapped some nearby branches off a fig tree and started tying these belts around their waist. The other thing is that the word translated aprons is it's hard to pick a good word here. Apron is pretty good. But really, the best word, even though it sounds weird, the best word to use is probably belt. They made for themselves fig leaf belts. And I have a feeling that's more along the lines of what we're dealing with. Branches snapped off and threaded together and tied around the waist. And I just say that because they would have pulled them tight around their waist and tied them. And when Jesus was getting crucified, soldiers tied thorns around his head real tight and tied him. And I just wonder if there's some sort of allegorical parallel between the fig leaf apron and the crown of thorns, But that's just something I've thought about before. Probably won't include that in the video. Belt is such a strange interpretation, though. Apron's probably better to go with. You get the idea, though, that they sewed fig leaf aprons. You get the idea that this is something they sat and put effort into, and that wouldn't be the right idea, But when you read down a little further here,
And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him,
Where art thou?
And he said,
I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself.
Because I was naked, and I hid myself. So you can tell that when they heard the Lord, that they were naked, and they ran and hid because of that. So there was no time for making these fig leaf aprons before that. And it would have been when they were hiding among the trees of the garden that they would have made these fig leaf aprons, So I'm just kind of pointing that out to show you that 7b is inserted. It contains a truthful detail, but it's inserted where it is to just clean the text up a little bit and to make it more, what's the word I'm looking for, Lane?
Would you say like family friendly?
Family friendly, yeah. Yeah.
More appropriate to all sorts of readers, because it really, man, it seems, you're right, it does seem like it's put in a very bizarre piece that it, in verse 21, it's not until then do they have, cloths of skin for them and stuff like that, but they did it once already in verse 7. Seems kind of strange. Seems like this is the more appropriate place where he clothed them afterwards, after this whole event. And it just seems weird why they do it once already in verse 7b. That's all.
Well, I guess the difference is these fig leaf coverings were made by Adam and Eve themselves, and whereas God provided the appropriate covering that required the death of an animal, verse 21. It's almost like God doesn't find their coverings made by their efforts suitable. It doesn't satisfy or something. It's no good. So he has to provide the coverings of verse 21. That is That's another way I can emphasize in verse 21 that we do have a sacrifice here. Because God's, they covered up. But God has a reason, a need to provide the appropriate covering, and it involves the death of an animal and stuff. Like, I always knew in verse 21 there, I think you have animal sacrifice referred to.
Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothed them.
But you can't prove it. It's inferred. And but the fact that he was replacing coverings they had made, that could emphasize that in verse 21 we do have indeed an animal sacrifice going on. I'm sorry, man, I got sidetracked there a little bit.
No, that's okay. That's really interesting. Yeah, I think I see what you're saying now. Where maybe it's not weird that the priest put that covering in 7b, because maybe Adam and Eve did make coverings of their own, but I think the placing of it just signifies that he's trying to, like you said, like we've talked about, make it more appropriate, more family friendly, I guess.
Yeah.
And as for like the first, as for verse 21, as this potentially could be the first instance of the first sacrifice, this could be the first instance of sacrifice needed to be a propitiation for sin.
Well, Adam, depending on how you read, in the day you will die. Well, Adam had to die because of what he did. Of course, Adam did receive a curse for what he did, And in that verse it says, in the day you eat thereof, you will surely die. We've talked about how that doesn't have to mean on the day. So, I don't know. It's just true that death did occur that day. And it's in verse 21, 3:21.